Hi Ian, great to meet up with you. Discuss things regarding your own swing, the system in general. Just as promised, quick recap on the key points that we covered during your visit. Predominantly from face on, we were talking about the loading pattern, the way the accumulators load, and just to remind you on that, accumulator 1 is the bending and straightening of the right arm. Accumulator 2 is the hinging and unhinging of the wrists. Accumulator 3 is the rolling and releasing of the back of the left hand or the left forearm, which relates to the club face. And accumulator 4 is the movement of the left arm towards and away from the right shoulder. So what we were seeing initially was, when we looked at it from face on, we were seeing almost this sort of artificially wide takeaway where the butt of the club almost sort of moves away before the club head. Very typical of what you would have seen in years gone by, and still from Colin Montgomerie. As you do that, you can see that the lead shoulder works pretty level. The upper centre mark with the red dot is pushed off its original starting point. And you can see that the hips sort of move slightly away from the target and certainly don't sort of turn gradually from the offset. So we've got this sort of low and slow takeaway that creates this sort of artificially wide P2 position when the shaft's parallel to the ground. We can see that in doing that, we've got the ascent of the club head is very delayed. You can see some players who you no doubt teach who will do this to a greater degree, and you'll start to see this lead knee being pulled across and the upper centre drifting more substantially in reaction to what the lead shoulder's doing. So you will see that on a day-to-day basis from the guys at your club who struggle with a low point, struggle with any sort of predictability regarding the path. It's nearly always, in this instance, to the left, but in many varying degrees. So that was what we're seeing initially in the takeaway. From this sort of, like we said before, from this attempt to create a lot of width early in the piece, we can see that accumulator 1, the right arm, doesn't really load. P1 to P2, it's doing very little. It's getting moved away from the side as well, so we're getting this sort of almost like this disconnection. And when viewed from down the line, we also saw, and we'll look at that shortly, the club working slightly outside the line initially in the takeaway. We then start to put a lot of load in the wrists. The right arm's still not really doing a great deal. As we load the wrist more, so as accumulator 2 loads more, we start to cup the lead wrist. Cupping the lead wrist will substantially open the club face to the path of the club and can result in shots that leak out to the right. And obviously the reaction to that will be to roll the club face too much, which is what we see later in the piece when we look at it from down the line. Then as we get to the top, accumulator 1, the right arm starts to load. Accumulator 4, the left arm gets a little bit too near the right shoulder, and we have this sort of this narrow armsy look that you described, that sort of plagued you for a number of years, and obviously you've tried to combat it but never really succeeded in any sort of in any great way. So we did a number of things. We put the block behind the ball, maybe about a foot, maybe in line with the right foot, just to encourage the club to ascend a little bit quicker, which will encourage the lead shoulder to work down a little bit sooner, which will discourage the upper centre to get pushed off the ball quite as much, which in turn will allow will require your lead knee to work sort of, rather than just inwards, it has to flex towards the target line as well. So we'll see a slight difference in that. And we talked about the loading pattern and how you can load things late, you can load things early, or you could load things in an incremental manner, which is what our system or what the model will prescribe. So in this instance, we're trying to control the length of the arm swing as well. So we're trying to create a shorter arm swing. We're trying to load the wrists and the right arm a little bit earlier, so we see a little bit less disconnection at P2. We see a little bit less of a dramatic hinging of the wrists at P3. So everything is being done in a more incremental manner, and we see the hands and arms being controlled, so accumulator 1 and 4 being more controlled towards P4, the left arm neck getting as close to the right shoulder. What we're also seeing here is, because one of the keys was to use the body more and the arms less, instead of a sort of, let's say, a 90-degree shoulder travel, we're starting to see that the shoulders are really the main mechanism for propelling the butt of the club now. Once you remove a player's ability to lift his arms, he will start to use his body in a slightly different manner, as can be seen by the trail leg straightening more and the lead leg flexing more. The goal for yourself over the coming sort of weeks and months is to make the loading of the accumulators a little bit more incremental via the drills that we discussed, and you should start to see some subtle changes in the way your body's working, as we're sort of looking here. Lower centres more stable, lead shoulders working differently, obviously arms are being controlled. Lower body and, well, torso really is my main change there that I like, and we just keep adding more and more to the arms. If we take a little look down the line, we touched on it before. One of the big issues we had at the start of the session was that the club would go back slightly too much outside the line, due to the butt of the club leading, due to the trail leg not straightening at quite a high enough rate, and then we see that sort of lift to the top. Club gets a little bit long, a little bit wristy, overloading accumulator 1, the right arm's over flexing, the left arm's starting to bend, etc, etc. Towards the end of the session, we see that the takeaway now is a little bit less outside the line. It doesn't need to necessarily be more in than that. That's just your way of doing things. I haven't got a massive problem with that. The body gets engaged much sooner. A little bit less lifting and cupping of the wrists at that point. And at P4, accumulator 4, the left arm, accumulator 1, the right arm, much more under control. And we're also starting to see the effects of the body being involved more via the gap in the knees. So we've got the lead leg flexing forward as the trail leg straightens, and that's creating a little gap between the knees. So some sort of down the line benefits from the work that you've done during the takeaway. We can see that the lead arm is in a little bit more now. The shaft is a little bit more laid down, so coming from the inside is a little bit easier prospect. Fewer compensations. You can see the shaft getting onto the right forearm in a much more gradual manner, rather than that sort of club out in front of you sort of scenario that people try and create. You know, you've got the club out in front of the hands, which is fine if you want to hit a little low fade, rather than the club inside the hands, which is more conducive to hitting a little bit more of a higher draw shot. It's not a given, you can still compensate from there, but these are things that sort of fit the model, patterns that you would expect to see from a player who's trying to draw the golf ball. You can see the sweet spot doesn't get on the target line quite as soon. There is substantially less roll through the hit. You can see there, if I highlight the sort of movement of the right arm or right wrist, hand coming off, sign that accumulator 3, the left hand, is really rolling. In order for that to happen, the handle has to raise dramatically, which is pushing the right hand off the grip or causing the right hand to come off the grip. And then as we come further through, we see a marked difference in the amount that the club face rolls at that point. Exits more under control, starting to use the lower body differently, and that's been brought around through hitting shots where you hit hard and stop quick. In order to stop quick, this is almost like a reverse engineering exercise for a golf swing. In order to stop the follow through quickly, the arms must stay on the torso, For the arms to stay on the torso, the hips must be continuously unwinding. For the hips to continuously unwind, they must come out of the forward bend. And for the hips to come out of the forward bend effectively, the lead leg and the trail leg must start to extend through the hip. So you start to use the ground in a more effective manner, which in turn improves your kinematic sequence. So you started to see the effects of a hit hard, stop quick drill. And you know, at a very early stage, this was probably about a 30-minute period where we just asked you to stop a little bit quicker, allied to the changes we made from P1 to P4, and everything started to look a little bit more organised as you come through the golf ball. From that point on the right, it would just be a case of softening the arms. The hip slide is maxed out, which is over in sort of this direction. The extension is maxed out, which is the upper centre staying fixed and the hips driving towards the target. So the slide, the extension and the rotation are all maxed out, at which point we can start to sort of bring the head off the wall, come out of our inclination to the ground, and it's just a case of softening up the arms. So some nice changes in a relatively short space of time. Hopefully we can watch this one progress over the coming weeks and months. I look forward to your feedback. Certainly the recent feedback relating to the club face closure down the line looks very promising. And like I say, I look forward to discussing this further with you in the near future. Nice meeting you again. It's been a while. I hope it's not too long till we catch up again. Well done.